The Constitutional Assembly is committed to a transparent and inclusive process of drafting the new Constitution. This program is brought to you by the Constitutional Assembly to help you understand the issues that are being debated in the process of writing our country's new Constitution.
Good evening. Tonight on Constitutional Talk, we continue our discussion on state institutions which support constitutional democracy. This week, we examine the Commission for Gender Equality. Before we discuss what this commission is and what it does, let's take a look at an insert which illustrates some of the pervasive inequalities that still exist between men and women in our society.
Scattered across South Africa are many forgotten rural communities where traditional customs still prevail. The women of these villages suffer greatly under the burden of dealing with conditions such as poor water supplies, no access to land, inadequate health services, education and childcare. In many instances, their menfolk have gone off to the cities to seek work, leaving the women to maintain the family. Despite their valuable contribution, the women are often relegated to observer status when the local chief and elders meet to make decisions affecting the community. Macy Kiogila of Madibogo has challenged the authority of the local chief. She mobilized the women of her area to work together to improve their living conditions. Her efforts were initiated by Lesedi Moeketsi of the Rural Women's Movement, a network of 45 rural women's groups in the northern provinces. They in turn are supported by TRAC, the Transvaal Rural Action Committee, an NGO building support for struggling communities. By encouraging the women to assert their political voice, Macy displeased the chief.
We've got a lot of problems against the chiefs because here in the rural areas, the chiefs, the tribal people don't like women to take part in taking decision or talking something. And when they see some women, like we, the Rural Women's Movement, we've got groups. And then we are trying to make things like making gardens and other things. And we are participating in talking, like asking what is happening about the monies and other things. Then the chief don't like that things. We want to know about the money that we take out from our houses. So we want to know what happened with the money. Because we always hear that everything must be transparency, and the chiefs don't want transparency.
Women were often relegated to the fringes of society, but they remained instrumental to the fight against apartheid. During the CODESA and MPNP negotiations, women had to fight for their place at the table.
Women from different political party backgrounds were able to come together from time to time and just look at things focusing on their particular experience and therefore positions and preferences in terms of the debate that would now be engaging different political parties, where males tended sometimes not to be necessarily of the same view as their women comrades. Because you must remember, the women had to force their participation into that period by saying, we insist that 50% of the delegation must be women. So if the delegation is 2 people, negotiators, the one must be a woman. So it didn't come, as I said to you earlier, Now, that thing of having a women's forum, a women's caucus, continued when we got to Parliament. We had to create a women's caucus, and therefore that enabled women from different political party backgrounds to come together and to exchange thoughts and clarify matters to themselves as women, as people with a common interest all the time. And that helped women to understand that there were issues on which they might not be able to express themselves against a particular view which the party they were part of took an opposing view to. But the caucus enabled them to at least not oppose. So that women's caucus was very helpful. Those, of course, were the same times as we were busy with the Women's Charter, which Frini had championed before we created Parliament. And in fact, we were able to get Parliament to adopt it, as we were also busy with the constitution-making process, so that from it, we informed the content of the Constitution. The whole discussion of the women's machinery throughout the country, which also took us to the question of what is now a commission, on gender matters for the country, and therefore focused on matters that are critical and key to women being able to also feel this democracy, feel this human rights culture that we all have fought for and have worked hard here in this constitution-making process. So we then also had delegations of people that were traditional leaders and were representing, therefore, the aspirations and the voice of traditional leadership across the country. And I remember a particularly heated debate because they had a problem with the issue of equality. And we were saying, hell no, we have not been fighting in the liberation struggle, so when we get here, we say no, women cannot be equal. When we're talking about human rights for all, everybody has a right to human rights, and therefore you dare not say women must wait to for a future date that's not known by anyone. When would that be? So it was very tense, to a point where, again, it went back to our own party political spaces as caucuses, because now and again you have to, even at the World Trade Center, continues in Parliament, there's a study group, there's a point where you get an opportunity as the particular members of a particular party to be on your own, just to talk things through. And it was very hard, because a unit was created just to unblock a particularly tense moment where the demands of the traditional leaders had to be brought down to a crisp formulation about how then do we come out of this, because there's this tension between the two parties within the negotiations, the women's rights, the traditional leaders' position of feeling threatened by the notion that women are going to have equal rights. So they go away and they come back, and I remember a comrade who was a lawyer, who was part of that unit that was sent out to go and come back with a proposed formulation. They come back, and they come back with a formulation suggesting that in traditional communities, women must not immediately enjoy these rights. Man, did we go crazy? What? What are you telling us? People fought and died. Women died as much as men died. So how dare you say women must wait because they are women? So in traditional communities, so that was the most heated moment. And that was still in the World Trade Center before we got to Parliament.
What was day one of office like when you first walked into that parliament?
Oh, people. Oh, it was horrible for women. You know, there were no toilets.
We've heard the story.
There were no toilets for women. So the first thing there is that women were very strong about wanting to have a toilet. Nozizwe Nakula, fiesty, femme lady, and I mean, saying no, you know, we must. So we really had challenges that were real. First, there were women with young families, and there was no facility for crèches for children there. So all of those things had to be that. But you know what it did? It brought us very closer and closer together. You know, we started thinking not as your political party. We started thinking now as parliamentarians.
Those were tough times, and many people have got stories to tell, because it wasn't just traveling South Africa. It was also traveling the world, going to learn from the others, doing benchmarking. I'm telling you a story that many went through. I'd get on those planes, go to the UN, to the US and be away for 3 weeks, go to India and be away for 3-4 weeks, leaving my young children. And when I get on the plane, actually, I take the blanket because I'm crying. I put a blanket so that people don't see that I'm crying, that I leave my children young as they were for so long. But the beauty of the moment is what you bring back, is what you have gained.
The story I want to tell has something of an honoring and a remembrance of Ricardo, our son. He was 7 years old when we went to Cape Town for me to start the job at the Constitutional Assembly. And when he passed in 2022, Marion Spalk, who was a co-deputy executive director with me at the Constitutional Assembly Secretariat, remembered this story. And she shared this on social media. The story was late in the night. She picks up a call in my office because my phone is ringing and I'm not in the office. And we did work a lot of late nights. She picks up the phone and a very tiny voice said, "Can I speak to Louisa Zondo?" And it's Ricardo calling. And of course I'm not there, so she asks, how can she help? And he tells her that he wanted to cook fish fingers, and he wanted to ask Mama how to prepare fish fingers because Mama is not here and it's late and they're hungry. And so Marion very gently advises, please don't try and prepare fish fingers. I'm quite sure Mama is going to get home sooner than later and she's going to bring food. And so this is a story that sat with me in such a huge way, because it reminded me that our children came along with us in these crazy roles that we threw ourselves into or were thrown into.
You know, there were hardly any female toilets around. If you want to get to a toilet, don't wait till the last, because you know you have to walk a distance to get there.
Sure.
Also, the gym they had here is also just for males. And There were also no facilities, because one of the reasons why women are not participating is our family commitments. Because what I've seen in the first 5 years, after Parliament sit, women go home because you have to fetch the children, you have to cook and all of that. And all the men gather in Parliament used to have 3 bars. And that's where they will get across multi-party. And I used to be amongst them, mostly alone. But then you must hear the camaraderie. There in Parliament, they are like fighting each other, but when they are sitting there together in a bar. And I even suggested in the Women's Caucus, let us as women also use the time to socialize, and get women to be more involved. So we also brought in a creche here at Parliament for women to bring their children with them to work. But with Vala, and she was a big feminist, she did a lot of changes to Parliament those years.
If you think back to those submissions or even that really big public hearing that you attended, what would you say is an example of things that came from ordinary people?
Many women's movements were very active as well. So it wasn't just, sort of ordinary people, but also organizations. The Women's National Coalition was a very powerful cross-party civil society organization of women that made submissions on, gender equality in the Constitution, the prevention of sex and gender discrimination. There are also gay and lesbian organizations, to make submissions on the sexual orientation, non-discrimination clause, and really also lobbied and advocated very hard, and reproductive rights groups. And so we interacted a lot with those groups, the Legal Resources Centre, the Centre for Applied Legal Studies, many NGOs and movements. I think that also enriched the process enormously, because you really had that sort of collective experience of not just ordinary people, but also the organizations that had supported them historically, but were still supporting them coming through.
Section 12(2) of the Constitution ensures that everyone has the right to make their own decisions regarding reproduction and maintain security and control over their body, stating, everyone has the right to bodily and psychological integrity, which includes the right, A, to make decisions concerning reproduction, B, to security in and control over their body, and C, not to be subjected to medical or scientific experiments without their informed consent. Section 9(3) of the Constitution states that the state may not unfairly discriminate directly or indirectly against anyone on one or more grounds, including race, gender, sex, pregnancy, marital status, ethnic or social origin, color, sexual orientation, age, disability, religion, conscience, belief, culture, language, and birth. This is essential in working towards gender equality today.
What stories would you share with us that, tell us about the time when you were the most happiest during this process?
Goodness me. When I was out of when I was Deputy Minister, there was a head of the final Constitution, Kirby could see my minister, got the idea that one should perhaps look at our legislation to see to what extent it discriminated against women.
Yeah.
And I was given the job of finding out this. And so we did a survey, and we had a meeting having done the survey, and we identified 35 bits of legislation. This is prior to the final constitution, but discriminated against women, for starters. And I had to present this to the department. So I looked down this table, and there was one other woman. The rest was a phalanx of men glaring at me. Anyway, so I made the presentation, and they all agreed, yes, all right, we'll do that. And then I presented that legislation to Parliament, and it went through. So it was a start, but can you imagine the first time you start digging, you find 35 bits of legislation that discriminate against women, just the beginning, and on a superficial kind of survey. So I felt very happy to have done that as Deputy Minister of Justice. That was one of my happy moments.
So the value of the Constitution is that it gives you rights. You can hold it up and say to the politicians and say to our leaders, but this is what it says here. It says I have a right to land. It says I have a right to this, a right to that. And of course, there is a recognition that some of these rights would not be possible to experience immediately. It's a process of development, but you have that. You can actually use it to mobilize and ensure that Parliament is structured in a way such that those rights are being implemented. I mean, just the other day there was a celebration of the Constitutional Court, which was turning 30. And then in that celebration, and we have a woman now as the Chief Justice, physically that is change that you can see. And she deserves to be there. She's trained as a lawyer. She has qualified. She qualifies to lead that institution.